Yeah,
And we can get started. And I'm very fortunate on this episode of the Sling of Ages podcast, which is episode number 14 of season 7, to talk to Ben Tweed about his wonderful new album, Life Cycles. The album Life Cycles came out on June 13th, and I'm very fortunate to have Ben here. Ben, how are you?
I'm doing well, man. Thanks for having me.
Great to have you here. I noticed I think it was on your website, you mentioned some of the people you play with, and you play with some of my favorite people. Walfredo Reyes Jr. is one of my favorite drummers. I think I first saw him back in the 80s when I was still living in Maryland. How'd you hook up with Walfredo?
So he's been on the road with Chicago for a number of years now, and he started off as a percussionist and eventually switched over to being their drum set player. And through a series of circumstances, he met somebody while he was on tour that happened to live in the Cincinnati area, and they got married, and he moved here. So basically, whenever he's not on the road with Chicago, uh, we'll have this trio, me and Walfredo and a local bass player here, Matt Wiles, have a trio, and we play. Uh, it's kind of our just like fun trio where we just play a bunch of fun repertoire. It's nothing like you know the music on the album is all my like original compositions, and it's intricate, complicated music. But the stuff that we play with Wilfredo is more like, let's play like the Headhunters version of Watermelon Man, or like Cantaloupe Island, or like whatever. And it's fun. You go through. Everybody comes up through music in different ways, but for me, tunes like Watermelon Man and Cantaloupe Island was stuff that we were given in high school, because
Mhm,
they're
mhm.
simpler melodies and easier tunes to wrap your mind around. And then it's fun to go back. It's like, okay, now I'm a much more experienced musician. I'm playing with this drummer who's kind of, on top of the scene, and we're playing Cantaloupe Island, and it's like, oh, this is a fun new perspective on this. So we do that basically whenever he's not on the road with Chicago. We'll set up some shows locally and play around and just have some fun.
Yeah, I didn't know that he was in the Midwest. That's wonderful to hear, and I know he's
Yeah,
extremely busy touring. What about Dan Wilson? I reviewed one of his albums a few years ago and loved his playing as well.
yeah. So Dan is one of those players. There's a number of prominent musicians whom a lot of people just kind of assume that they live in New York or LA or whatever just because they're so prominent. But to my knowledge, I don't think Dan ever moved from Akron.
Mm.
I don't think, I know he plays all over the place and does all kinds of things, but I don't think that his home has ever not been in like Northeast Ohio and like Cleveland, Akron area. So Dan is very plugged into the local scene there, as well as doing all of his stuff. Like with Christian McBride, or when Joey DeFrancesco was with us. Dan played
Mhm.
with him. So he has this really cool career, the kind of career that I aspire to have, honestly, to where you can be really invested in your scene at home and play with your people who you came up with, but also, do some more higher profile kinds of get like the Blue Note Cruise, or whatever. Um, so I got connected with Dan. There's this trombone player named Sam Blakesley who I've played with a number of times over the years. He's originally from Columbus, and he lived in Northeast Ohio for a good amount of time, and he lives in New York now. Great trombonist, big band arranger. And through a lot of the shows that I've driven up to Akron or Cleveland and played with Sam, I've gotten connected with a lot of the musicians up there, and I feel a very strong rapport with my Northeast Ohio musician friends, and Dan just happens to be one of them.
Right,
So
and
he's
his
called me up. He's called me up to play with his group in Ohio at like Blue Jazz in Akron, or we did a gig in Columbus a couple years ago. So it's fun, that Dan keeps me looped in. I'm very appreciative of that.
well, it's really a testament to who you are as a musician that you're able to sit with these well-known musicians who are great, but it says a lot about your skill. And I think one of the things I liked about Life Cycles is I I think some of us always think we think jazz, we think New York City, we think LA. And
Yeah.
oh, my God, the center of the country has such great players and so
Yeah.
many great places to play too. So let's get to Life Cycles. And I really enjoyed the album. How did it come across? I believe it's your second album or second or first or your first full album, because I know you did a
Yeah.
four-song EP before that.
Yeah, yeah. So I did a very like kind of small scale self-produced EP a few years ago, and it's kind of funny that it came out like just before the pandemic hit. It was very much like something that most people would think of as like, oh, this is like a pandemic project kind of thing.
Hmm,
It's like, I need something to do, so I'm gonna record these free improvisations. But I actually did it just before the pandemic started. It just kind of happened that project of that nature just came to me at that time. But this, I would consider this to be my first like real like album that I've put a lot of resources and planning into, right? And the first album that I put out with compositions that I've written and with my group that's been rehearsing for a couple years and playing local shows here for a few years now.
mhm.
Um, and all of the stuff that I've written on the album is all the culmination of many years. I've always been, as a composer, I've always been more the type to write based off of like flashes of inspiration rather than the type of composer who's like super diligent and writes something every day, right?
Right.
I feel like generally when you're a composer arranger, you fall into one of those two categories. And composers like me, it's like, well, I've got to convince myself that it's time to write, and then I'll write something. But I need if I ever want to if you ever want me to do something for you, if you ever want me to like write something for you, like I need a deadline. Otherwise, it's never gonna happen. That's just how I'm wired, and
Mhm.
I'm certainly not alone. I think I could be wrong about this, but I'm pretty sure Duke Ellington was on the record saying something similar that like I would never write anything if I didn't have deadlines to contend with.
Yeah, a
So
little pressure there, right?
yeah, yeah, and it's interesting, um, that I live in this place where there are a lot fewer external pressures than somewhere like say New York or LA or Nashville where it's just like you're in the you're in the jungle and you just got to fight for your survival in those places because everybody's good and you've got to really be on top of your game or you're going to get passed up for whomever else, and that's not nearly as much the case here. So a lot of my battle with myself has been about, I have to find this motivation deep within myself. And whenever I do, I always feel so much more rewarded than being pushed into whatever it is by these external forces, which is one of the reasons why I've stayed here and not moved to, a bigger, more uh, higher notoriety kind of music scene. I like the challenge of having to contend with myself a little bit.
Great. So tell us a little bit about your trio. You have Tom Buckley on drums and Justin Dawson on bass. And I think you've alluded to the fact that you've been playing with him for a while.
Yeah, so Justin and I met when we were in school. We went to the Cincinnati Conservatory. He was an undergraduate student while I was a graduate student there. We kind of hit it off while we were in school, and then a few years later, he's like, "Hey, I'm gonna start this like serious trio project. You want to do it?" So I've known Justin. We've been friends for a long time.
Mhm.
Tom, I remember when I first met Tom. So I moved to Cincinnati in 2016, and there was this space that some friends of mine and eventually I used to run called the Golden Mean, and it was a place where we did all these like jam sessions and DIY concerts, and we'd get some surprisingly notable people who'd pass through and do this like it was like a loft concert. It's just a door deal. We'll give you the space and you sell your tickets, but ultimately it's just like this is a loft concert, and people just you just get your ticket sales. We're not like a club, right?
Mhm.
And we got some great players. We got Noah Preminger came through there, Jason Marsalis and his group. Um, JD Allen had a great trio show there. So we got some pretty serious players going through there, and that was one of the first places when I moved to town. I'd check out just like what was going on there. I'd go to shows or whatever. And I remember the first jam session I went to at that space. First of all, I was like, I had come from Omaha, Nebraska, which has a much smaller music scene than anywhere in Ohio does. I just remember being struck, like, man, like I'm in the Midwest still, but the level of players here is so high. Like I couldn't
Yeah.
believe, like just at this little loft jam
Mhm.
session in Cincinnati, how good everybody sounded. And Tom was one of the musicians where like we were sitting in. I was sitting in on something. And I think we were just like sight reading a tune, because it was a kind of jam session where people might bring in tunes and we might read it down, real informal, loose kind of session. I just remember thinking like, man, this guy's really good at the drums and he's really good at reading, which is, as you may know, for drummers, can be hit or miss.
Great.
And so those skills, being a good reader, it's not necessary. It's not like every drummer I ever work with has to be a great reader, but for my group in particular, like having a drummer who can read a score and provide adequate interpretation just based off of what they see, like on the first pass. And of course things will get
Mhm.
refined, and drum parts are always nebulous, but like I thought that's one thing that always struck me about Tom is like you could give him a chart and he can turn it into something like on the first pass, and that's not always the case.
Right. That's pretty amazing.
Yeah.
So, going back a little bit, when did you start composing? Because you mentioned how you need to compose for a project. When did you start composing the album? And what was your first composition? Because
So
there are
the first,
9 songs on the album.
yeah. So the very first composition, that's the second track on the album, which is entitled "Flow Out." And I wrote that in all the way back in 2017. I was still in school when I wrote that one, and it was it wasn't the only composition that I had written at the time that fell under this category. But before that time in my life, I've been working on composing since about 2012 or 2013 or so. Basically, when I started my undergraduate degree was when I really started diving into composition in earnest, and I spent a lot of time in the computer lab at my undergrad, writing arrangements and writing tunes and orchestrating, and like I basically, not entirely, but I taught myself a lot of the way, just like doing it a lot. um, Perhaps some of it was me procrastinating on my piano practice, in order to work on my composing. I'm always, even when I'm being productive, I have to procrastinate somewhere else, right? That's I can't get away from that. So my writing up until that point had been very like I was very focused on the craft and really focused on writing music for its own sake, right? Which is perfectly valid, and tons of great music has been written for its own sake. But Flow Out, amongst some other stuff that I was writing in the same period of time, was one of the first times that I really started writing music that was directly related to my life experiences rather than just writing music for its own sake. And I think I wrote somewhere in my press materials about how Flow Out was like the first time that in my adult life that I had really like commiserated with someone very close to me that was having a hard time and was like really crying. It was like the first time that I like really engaged in that way, like in a mature way as an adult. And it's like, whoa, like
Mhm.
I'm changing. I was like what, 22 or 23 at the time, which that's an adult, but like you're still learning a lot about life when you're at that. And I'm still learning a lot about life
Right.
at my age now. But it was just it was a really big turning point, and I think that was the strongest thing that I wrote from that time. And it's one of those things that's always kind of endured in my book, like ever since I wrote it all the way back then. And I'm still. It's funny. I'll go back and listen to recordings of myself playing from that time, and I'll be just like disgusted. You know, like, oh, what was I doing? Who even was I? But the compositions from that time, I still can look back and be like, still pretty good. Like I'm proud of that work. And I've always felt that way. I've always felt a lot more natural of a composer than a pianist. I feel like I still have to grow a lot as a pianist now, but as a composer, it's always felt a lot more natural and intuitive to me.
So you said you started writing the Flow Out was the first song, and that was 2017 or so. Did you say 17?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, yeah, 2017. Yeah,
How has your playing style changed since 2017? Or
man,
has it?
it definitely has. That's a really good question. One, so um, I think the core of what makes my playing unique to me hasn't really changed since then. I feel like I value the same things more or less now that I did then, but there are a lot of things that I've leaned into over the past 7 or so years the 7, 8 years that I've not been in school and I've just been out playing as a working musician. Some of the things that I've really like accrued in that time is one, I have way better sensibilities for like popular music, right? As a working musician, I have to play top 40 stuff. I have to be like clued in to what the general public likes because,
Mhm.
that's what pays my bills. So I feel a lot more tuned into that. And it's like, it's not that I'm bowing to that influence as a composer, but it certainly has changed and shaped the way that I play and write. Like, how could it not? Being more
Mhm.
tuned into what people like to listen to in general. Um, and kind of as a side note, the way that the album was produced, which some people may like and some people may not, I did it more like a classic jazz album in that we were all in one room, and there wasn't isolation. So the drum sound doesn't sound as like crispy and tight as it does on isolated drums. The piano is a little bit out of tune. There's a few like artifacts from recording that to me are elements that humanize it a lot more and are things that take us out of I feel like everybody wants to make like anytime anybody wants to make an album nowadays, they want to make it sound like a pop album. Everything's got to be super clean. Everything's got to be separated. You've got to put compression on everything. Yada da 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 da. Right? And eventually I'll probably make an album that's more conventionally produced by today's norms. But I wanted to make this album because like it's my first album. Nobody has any expectations from me, so it's like, why don't I just go off on a limb and try to make something that sounds more akin to what you might expect to come out of, yeah, at least sonically, right? What you might expect to come out of like Blue Note or Atlantic back in the 1960s, right? Um, Sorry, what was he? What was the
Oh, I
first?
mean,
I went off on a tangent. I forgot
boy,
the.
no, I'm glad you did because one thing, Brandon Coleman
Yeah,
produced and mixed the album,
yeah,
and you talked about the sound. It sounds live and it sounds warm.
yes,
It
yes,
sounds like a jazz album. It
yes,
doesn't sound like a programmed smooth jazz album. It sounds like a
yes.
really well played, well composed, and well recorded jazz album. So
Thank you.
I mean,
That's what I was
Brent,
going. That's what I was aiming for.
and the fact that you're the producer as well as the songwriter and the band leader really brings, I think, a depth to the entire record. So if that's what you're going for, you got it. I mean, this.
Good, good. I'm glad that comes across because that was very much my intention was for it to not be what you hear from, and not again, like I have no qualms with musicians producing modern albums in modern ways. Like, well, of course you're gonna stay up to date with some of the more modern production techniques, and I get that. But it's like I wanted to throw something a little bit different than we're used to hearing, at least from records that are being put out now. From a sonic perspective, I wanted to give that a shot.
And I think you certainly did that because it is. Um, I don't want to say it has a classic jazz feel and sound to it, but it does. It's well
Yeah,
composed, it's extremely well played, and it's well produced. And what more do you want from jazz beyond that? That's
I appreciate
perfect.
it, man.
So how'd you bring Brandon Colvin into the group, the mix, in terms of him mixing it and then also master and also engineering it?
Yeah, so Brandon's a very good friend of mine. He was kind of one of the first people I really hooked up with when I moved here to the Cincinnati area. And Brandon is a phenomenal guitarist, composer,
Hmm.
a musical polymath of sorts. Um, has great piano chops too. He's got it all. And he and I work together. We have this fusion project called Spherical Agenda, with all like local musicians, and that's another project where it's like all compositions between him and me. We write all of the or almost all of the tunes for that band. So Brandon and I have had a working relationship, and we're very good friends for a long time, and we've done a lot of work for each other over the years. Kind of in as it works out on a lot of these smaller music scenes. People don't always have the money to pay each other to do things like these recording projects. So a lot of the time, it's like, hey, I'll do this for you if you get me back with this work later, or like I recorded this album for you. You want to mix this for me? Whatever. So that's one of the reasons like he and I are like very in tune with each other creatively. So I
Mhm.
could tell him like on the producer side of things like, oh, I'd like for this thing to happen, and he knows what it is that I want, and he can do it. So that's at least how the mixing process worked. And then for mastering, Brandon got a ton of mastering experience. There's uh, this series of albums that came out and I think is still coming out, based in Cincinnati. It's a great project to check out. It's called For the Love of King, and it's a series of albums that are dedicated to reviving King Records in
Hmm.
Cincinnati. I don't know how familiar you are with the history of King Records, but they produced tons of really really popular music back in the 50s and the 60s, including the original recording of The Twist by Chubby Checker that was recorded at King Records. A lot of the early James Brown stuff was recorded at King Records, so like all the like Famous Flame stuff, like Try Me was recorded there, that kind of stuff. So King Records has this great legacy, and there are all these amazing artists that are paying their honors to King Records, including like Eric Clapton's on the record series, some musicians from Snarky Puppy. I literally couldn't name you like all of the artists. Victor Wooten's on it, I think. It's
Hmm.
like a really, really, and I'm on a couple of tracks too. And it's this big album project, and basically the guy that was in charge of the project was like, Brandon, master all of it. So he got a ton of mastering experience like real quick, doing that whole project. So it's just like, hey, you want to master my album too? And it's like, yeah, I've been doing this for, you know, I think it was literally like a 40 part thing, like where he had to do like 40 CDs and records and stuff. So like,
Yeah, I just looked it up. Looks pretty amazing. I'll check it out. So,
yeah.
with regard to recording process, as producer and sole composer, how long did it take you to record the album?
So we did everything in the span of 2 days. It ended up
Oh,
being about a day and a half. And a lot of the recording process, honestly, it's funny, when you're preparing for recording. I felt the most nervous about like the most difficult tunes on the album, like the ones that are the most difficult and unwieldy to play. And I was concerned, like, oh man, like I don't want to take forever because this song, I've got the studio for 2 days, and this song is going to be at least, depending on how long we let things stretch out, it's going to be at least 6 minutes long, and I'm just thinking like, gears are turning, whatever. And then inevitably, on I think almost all of the tunes that fell under that category, we got them in one take.
Mm.
Um, and they weren't perfect takes by any means. And I had to weigh, do I allow this mistake to stay in there because I like the whole vibe of the recording? So I had to, a lot of the recording process was me weighing the vibe of the recording and like how and the feeling from that first take versus do I want to do it again, maybe get it a little bit cleaner. And a lot of the time we would even go for a second take and it's like, nah, the first take's better. So we had a lot of that sort. I don't know if you'd call it good fortune or just us being well prepared or the mood being right. I don't know, but it just turned out that some of the toughest tunes in my mind ended up being one take guys, right? Or like I remember specifically the tune Otherscape. We had gotten to the end of the first day and we were all like really tired, and it was just like, and I was like, okay, Otherscape is the next on my docket. Like, let's just do one quick take before the end of the day and see if it goes anywhere, and then we'll hit it first thing tomorrow if it isn't any good. And then of course, like that take ends up being this rarefied like magical thing, which again still has mistakes on it, of course. But I wanted to. I think because we prioritized just getting into it and just like making sure that everything feels right rather than making sure that everything is exactly right made it so that the recording process didn't take nearly as long as if I had been super meticulous on wanting to get every little detail right. I think back to one of the most uh, famous, infamous, notable recording situations from like the classic jazz era is back when Miles Davis had a contract with I can't remember the record labels that he was dealing with. I want to say Atlantic. No, no, not Atlantic. Um, anyway, so Miles had a record deal with a record label, and another label offered him a better deal, and he was like, "Oh, can I break the contract with you guys? I know I still have some stuff that I'm contractually obligated, but these guys are giving me way better of a deal, so I'd like to break the contract and go to them." And that record company was like, "No, you can't do that. You have to record 4 more albums for us because that's your contract." And I was like, "You want 4 more albums? Fine." And they did. I think it was one album a day, like or even quicker than that. I don't know exactly, but it was all basically like one take per song, and they
Hmm.
just cranked out these 4 albums, and it's the cooking, steaming, working, and relaxing with the Miles Davis quintet albums, and um, they're great albums, and I think that the fact that they're a little bit rough around the edges, maybe just because Miles is like, whatever, you guys have your albums, I don't care, I'm on to the next thing, as was often the case with Miles' career, right? On to the next thing,
Right,
right?
right.
Um, but those kinds of things embolden me to have this approach to making the album where it's like, yeah, it's not perfect, but like that's just being human, and we're just capturing these moments. Um, or I think to a more modern album, I don't want to put I don't want to put anybody on blast, but there's one modern album that I've listened to obsessively for many years, and like I really like dug deep into learning a lot of these tunes on this album.
Mhm.
And on one of the tracks, which is like a ridiculously difficult piece of music to execute, I was like, I learned the tune, And then I was listening to the piano solo, and I'm like, wait, they made like a huge mistake, and like, but then it just like they just picked it back up, and it was fine. It was just like, whoa, what, like now that I'm like intimately invested in it, it's like now I know that that was a mistake. But would I have known like before I was so deeply invested? No. And that kind of perspective where it's just like, oh yeah, that's fine. Like even a seasoned musician that's listening to this isn't necessarily going to know that I was supposed to play this note here or whatever, you know?
Yeah, I mean, you're the composer, you're the producer, so it may be a mistake to you, but to a
Yeah,
listener, they would never know,
yeah,
and it may be something which is which really brings them into that song and the album anyway. So that's
yeah,
fantastic.
yeah,
So I know we're running a little bit short on time, but I do want to ask you about a few of the compositions. You talked already
yeah.
about Flow Out, and you talked about, I think it was, you talked about Others Skate.
Other skate,
But
uh-huh.
what about the first track, Back to School?
Yeah, so that one I wrote kind of when musicians were all really starting to come back to work out of the pandemic, right? Because people in the service industry and people in the arts were two of the biggest groups of people that were impacted by this by COVID-19, right? And as people were starting to come back to work, I'd see people at gigs and we'd play together, and we hadn't have played we wouldn't have played together for like the past 2 years at least, right? Or the way it would work, it's like I might work with so and so, but then I might not see them 6 months into my working season. It's like, oh wow, so it's been like 3 years since I've even seen you, right?
Hmm.
And this feeling of like seeing all these people who, I mean, they they live here. It's not like anybody went away or anything and came back or whatever. We had this feeling. I had this feeling of like coming back to school after a really long summer vacation, and it was kind of a fun, kind of a weird, kind of fun, interesting adjustment period where a lot of musicians were kind of re like relearning how to play together because we had just been
Hmm.
playing alone or over we'd send each other projects over Logic or whatever, and it was that feeling of coming back after having been gone for so long made me think of going back to school after a very long summer vacation. So that's what that tune was born out of.
Oh, wonderful. Thank you. So the next on my list, and I know we're running short, but I'll ask you about
That's
two more.
that's fine.
Iowa. Oh,
Iowa,
I,
yeah,
is that Iowa?
Iowa, yes.
Yeah, tell me
So
about that.
so that's music that's inspired by I love Brazilian music of all shapes and sizes, but a type of Brazilian music that I've really been drawn to over the past few years is called baião, and it's based in the state of Bahia, which is in northeast Brazil. Um, it's kind of like the Brazilian countryside. It's not exactly in the rainforest, and it's not in the more urbane parts of Brazil, like the south in Rio and Brasilia and Sao Paulo. Those are all like more in the south. Up in the north and the northeast, it's more like the Brazilian countryside. And having grown up in Iowa myself, I feel a lot of kindred spirit with these musicians that grew up. They play music and they're like on their farm. They're playing music
Hmm.
for their like social events and stuff. So one of my favorite Brazilian composers is this guy Hermeto Pascoal, who's from that northeast Brazil state of Bahia. He's from this town called Lagoa da Canoa, and his experience learning how to play music. I mean, they literally didn't even have electricity when he was a kid growing up in the 30s and 40s in this part of Brazil. So like almost like from a different time. And they didn't have pianos out there. They had accordions and guitars and flutes and hand drums and stuff. So it's very it's like country music, for like traditional country music for Brazil, and it's all based around like social functions. So whenever you listen to Hermeto's music, very often there'll be this added atmosphere of like people speaking Portuguese, kind of like on the periphery. And it's like, well, that's how he grew up playing that music, was with all of these people like chattering at the local social or whatever.
Mhm.
So I feel this very strong connection with the Baiao, and it's a whole cultural thing up there. You know, it's not just a music. There's dance, and there's pageantry associated with all of it as well. A lot of it that dates back to African traditions, right? Back when slaves were brought to Brazil back in the
So,
1500s. One of the key things that one of the key differences between Brazil and here in the U.S. is that those slaves in the U.S., their cultural identity was suppressed, right? They didn't want the plantation owners didn't want them to have access to their music because they thought that it would be a means for them to organize against them,
mhm.
right? In Brazil, they had the opposite tack where they said, "Oh, let's like we want them to keep their traditions because they'll be happier if they have their own traditions." So a lot of these sorts of forró is the big umbrella of Northeast Brazilian music, and there's also this style called maracatu in Northeast Brazil, which is kind of like their carnival music
Mhm.
more in the Northeast. All of this stuff is based in this African pageantry. There's like coronation ceremonies and traditional dances, and I think it's all like very, very beautiful in the way that these very, very old African traditions melded with the local influence and the Portuguese influence, and it became this very beautiful thing of its own. And people in that area of Brazil are very proud of their music and their culture, and it's
Mhm.
very strong and robust. And I feel a lot of um, love, I guess, for that music and those people. It almost reminds me of like the Brazilian version of the blues in a way.
Mhm.
And so Iowa is my tip of the hat to that. And the title of the tune, it goes back to, so Baião comes from the fact that people from the state of Bahia, or Baianos, are the people that make that music. And it's like, well, I'm not cool. I'm not from Bahia. I'm from the state of
Uh,
Iowa, not from the state of Bahia. So it's an Iowa. It's not a Baião.
yeah, thanks for that background. Did you bring in full arrangements for the band, or did you guys play with that when you were in the studio for those 2 days?
Yeah, so there was a there was a little bit of both. So some tunes, like Back to School, for example, is very scored out. There's like a little improvisation section. I think
Mhm.
it's only 9 measures long, and we spend a lot of the time in the tune there. But all the stuff that doesn't happen in that kind of middle section is all scored out. So that's one example of a tune that's like I have a lot of detail put into it. Or Otherscape is another one where there's not really. I mean, Tom is improvising his drum part, but the stuff that Justin and I are playing is not really improvised. Or if it is, like I'm just riffing a little bit on this structure that I've created. Whereas
Hmm.
other tunes, or Iowa, for example, is another one where most of the tune is entirely written out. And then once we get to the end, you know, when it's just on the going back and forth between those two chords, it really opens up, and we get to play around a little bit. But honestly, when you have a group like this, you know, this is a group that has rehearsals, and you know we've played together for a while. I think inevitably a structure of sorts emerges just from the type of rapport that you have with your band. For
Mhm.
example, I like to think of John Coltrane's "A Love Supreme" for that sort of thing. Where if you look at, you can find the score for "A Love Supreme," and it's like very not conventional, right? It's just like we kind of do this, and then we move over to here, and it's like we're looking at these sorts of shapes, but it's not exactly, or like, here's this idea, I want to play this idea, and I'm going to move it around in all 12 keys, or whatever. So he has Coltrane had plans and he had general ideas, but the execution of those ideas would kind of be up to how the band wanted to respond to those things in the moment. So a lot of my writing is like that too, where I'll have things and it's like, okay, I want this to happen, or when I do this, I'd like you guys to respond in this way. Um, so there's a little bit of all of that. I like to um, I really like music that you can't tell where the written part begins and where the written part ends and where the improvised part begins. That
Mhm.
music to me is like thrilling because you'll have this thing going on and it sounds like chaos, and then they all just hit this downbeat together and it's like, what was all of that planned? Or like what was that, just like this beautiful moment of organic improvisation? I don't know, right? So I like to convey that sort of image to who's ever listening to. Like, I don't exactly want everybody to know that now we're improvising and now this is the composition and now we're improvising. I'd rather it all be this more nebulous thing. And it comes down to treating music like a language in that way, right? It's like we use
Right.
this language. I try, as a band leader, I try not to do a lot of like verbal communication. Sometimes you have to, but like I prefer to communicate through my instrument as much as I possibly can.
Mhm.
And I strive to make music that works in that way, that works to serve that sort of idea, using
Yeah.
music as
Well,
a means of communication.
that works really well. I mean, Life Cycles is very dynamic. It's very, very vivid. So
Thank you.
thanks for that. So what's next for you? Are you planning on some live dates?
Yeah, so we have a run of dates. I haven't, well, at the time of this actually releasing, I will have some materials out for it, but I have a run of dates, all local to Ohio, and that's in July. It is the week of July 21st. We have a run of dates, and if anybody checks my website and my social media and stuff, you'll see those dates. But we'll be playing at Cafe Vivace in Cincinnati, at Blue Jazz in Akron, at the Bop Stop in Cleveland, and then back to the Hearth Room in Cincinnati. So I'm very much looking forward to that. I as a working player, uh, I don't often get full weeks where I just get to play my music, So
Mhm.
that's something that I'm very excited for. Um, the ability to like really dive in. And any musician will tell you, if you play the same sets of music for a whole week, you just develop a totally different thing over all of it. It's something that you couldn't possibly cultivate just through practice and rehearsal. Just like playing and playing and playing this music night after night really sharpens you up on it in a special way. So I'm very excited for that. And then beyond that, I'm also definitely starting to look. I have all of the music written for my next album, and now it's just going to be up to planning the logistics. But I would like to get in the studio sometime in the next year for the next one. So onward and upward.
Well, Life Cycles is very enjoyable. I encourage everyone to
Glad
take
to
a
hear
listen
it.
to that and buy it. It's available via Bandcamp, and they should check out your website as well. Um, Ben, anything else you want to add?
Man, just thank you to you first of all, Preston, for doing this and for checking the album out, and thanks to anybody that wants to listen. There's so much music out there in the world today, and the fact that somebody would take a little stop my humble offering is that means a lot to me in any case. So even whether you like it or not, if you don't like the album, that's fine. Like I'm glad that you took the time to give it a chance. I think that's so important even now in this age where so much music so much of people's music experience is curated by algorithms and by other people who think that this is what you should be listening to. And I think just like going out on a limb and checking out somebody's independent album uh, is huge. I think that doing that, uh, regardless of whatever genre it is that you're checking out more independent artists, and not just going with what the stream or the algorithm feeds you is really important in today's age of listening.
Yeah, I agree. Absolutely. So thank you for your time
Thank you.
and take care of yourself. And again,
Yeah.
this was episode number 14 of season seven. We'll be back with the finale of season seven in 2 weeks. Ben, if you could stay on for 1 second while I turn off the